Good morning. I've got 10 o'clock, so we're going to go ahead and get our webinar started. I want to thank everyone for joining us this morning. This is Victoria Beal with the Ohio LTAP Center, and we are so pleased to have with us Burton Planning, who are our instructors for the Active Transportation Academy courses, specifically the Creating a Vision Zero Action Plan, which you're going to receive an overview of this morning on the webinar. And we have Kim Burton, who will be presenting for you here in a few minutes. I do want to cover a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. Hopefully everyone, when you joined, was able to see a conversation panel on the left-hand side of your screen, probably on the bottom left. If you don't see that, then you should see a bubble that is surrounded by a circle. It's like a speech or text bubble. You'll want to click on that, and that should then display the conversation panel. We have everybody muted as you have joined the webinar, and that conversation panel on the bottom left hand side, which you can activate by clicking on that circle with the text or thought bubble in it, is where we would ask that you pose questions during the actual presentation. And I will read those off to Kim. At the end of the presentation, we will open the phone line for questions. So I wanted to make certain that everyone was aware of how to communicate during the webinar. Also, we are attempting to record the webinar, and if we're successful, we'll send a link out to everyone once the webinar is finished. But if we're not successful, it's a good thing you're here, because you'll be able to still get the information. And we are so excited about having this as a course that's available now through the Active Transportation Academy, because we've learned through the years that big reductions in fatality numbers were much easier to get at the beginning when we started focusing on safety. They've become much harder as the years have gone on, because we've taken care of that low-hanging fruit, and now we're reaching for the fruit that's much higher up in the tree and harder to get to. But the only acceptable goal for our transportation system is 0 deaths, because no one wants to have that empty chair at their table when they sit down to dine with their friends and family. So we want to make sure that we help everyone in achieving that goal. And I know that that's what Kim is going to talk to you about this morning. And I would encourage you, once you're finished with the webinar, to not lose momentum. Go ahead and get the session scheduled, get it requested, get things moving, because it's only going to be through your actions after this webinar that we're truly going to be able to get the information out there to keep moving in the right direction. So with that, Kim, are you all ready?
I'm all ready. Can you hear me all right?
Sure can. It's all yours.
Right.
Thanks.
All right. Well, thank you, Victoria, and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today. As Victoria mentioned, my name is Kimberly Burton, and I'll be your speaker for today's webinar. Burton Planning Services currently manages the Active Transportation contract, and I serve as a project executive, and I also help develop courses and do course instruction. Amelia Mansfield is the project manager for this contract, so she's typically your main point of contact when you submit for instruction requests. So if you're interested afterwards, we'll have some steps on how to apply to get some type of instruction in your community. So today, this is an outline of what we'll review today. First, we'll talk briefly about what the Active Transportation Academy is, and then I'll cover the full course learning outcomes of what you will get if you take the full course. And then I'm going to run through some highlighted topics for each of the 4 parts of the full course. Introduction to traffic safety, addressing crash fatalities. Then we'll get into the basics of what Vision Zero is, and then how to implement Vision Zero in your community. So first, the Active Transportation Academy. If you're not familiar with it, the purpose of the Active Transportation Academy is to offer training to help communities reach their active transportation goals. This is offered through the Ohio Department of Transportation free of charge. So it's free trainings, free workshops to communities, jurisdictions, and groups throughout Ohio. So if you're a school district, a local government, health department, any related group like that can apply and get a training. And there's also professional development credits available for attendees. So there's a couple different ways here to get to the home page to see what courses there are and how to apply. If you go to ODOT's main page under Planning, under LTAP, there's the Active Transportation Academy, and then there's the hyperlink on there also for you. So briefly, our brand new courses that we've just rolled out in the last couple months. First is our Complete Streets Implementation course, where we run through how to build a complete streets policy or plan for your community. Next, we have an Advocating for Active Transportation course where you learn about advocacy efforts for your community. And today's webinar is covering the Creating Vision Zero Action Plan course. In addition, we have 3 newer courses, Community Traffic Calming Programs, Conducting Walk and Bike Audits, and Health and Equity in Transportation. And then some Train the Trainer courses include walking school bus training, crossing guard training, girls in gear training, and conducting a school walk audit. And then we also have some specific Safe Routes to School training and implementation program courses, including Safe Routes to School lesson plans, travel development plans, and non-infrastructure implementation, in addition to incorporating wellness, school and community policy and planning, and safety and active transportation, school and community planning. Coming soon, we've been working on developing the crossing guard training that we currently offer in person into an online on-demand format, and that is getting close to being ready. And then coming up soon, we're also developing an active transportation course related to rural communities with a focus on the different needs and demands in rural areas. Okay, so let's get into the Vision Zero Action Plan course. So the reason this is an important course, as Victoria mentioned, is that fatalities are just, at this point, the idea that they're unacceptable. And over the course of a lifetime, nearly everyone is touched by some type of traffic crash, whether personally or somebody they know and love. So this is an important topic, and upon completion of the course, you'll have the knowledge and skills needed to create a Vision Zero action plan that will address crash fatalities in your community. You'll be familiar with the fundamentals of traffic safety, various crash fatality initiatives, and then specifically the Vision Zero program details we'll get into. And then we also have resources and list of funding available to help guide implementation. So attendees will walk away understanding crash trends and traffic safety fundamentals. And this course is geared toward non-traffic engineers, so anyone with any background, we're going to run through this at a level that is palatable to everybody so that you can understand what's going into crashes, the data, and the trends that are happening over time, and then apply that to the local crash patterns in your community to understand what's happening there. And then we'll get into recognizing all the different programs that currently address crash fatalities. So we'll talk about Towards Zero Deaths, Road to Zero, and Vision Zero, and compare and contrast them, in addition to talking about what the Howard Department of Transportation does for traffic safety, programs, projects, studies. And then we'll have an exercise going into local traffic safety projects. And then walking away with a familiarity of Vision Zero really is the goal of this class. So understanding the goals, the components, the implementation steps of Vision Zero, and then not just understanding them, but also being able to apply them. So we'll work through all the different actionable items that come out of putting a Vision Zero action plan together and how it can be achieved in your community. in addition to, as I mentioned before, having those relevant resources available if you want to learn more or look into funding. So part one of the course, we'll discuss crash trends and traffic safety fundamentals. So first we'll define what traffic-related crashes are, what's included and what's excluded in the data. Then we'll talk about the patterns and causes of traffic-related crashes, such as severity, frequency, types, locations, contributing factors, etc. And then we'll, after we go through that, we'll have an in-class discussion on traffic-related causes and connecting them to solutions. Then we'll move on to focusing on pedestrian and bicycle specific crashes and what usually happens around those specific types of crashes. And at the end of this part, we'll go through the national, state, and local crash trends and how it's been changing over time and have an activity that focuses on that. So first, it's really important to define what a traffic-related crash is so that everyone is starting from the same base of knowledge. So a traffic crash is defined as an incident involving one or more motor vehicles where at least one vehicle was moving and the crash originated on a public roadway, and that's how US DOT defines that. So in class, we'll also review what's included and excluded in the data, such as privately owned roads or different types of vehicles, and also get into additional key terms so everyone understands what we're talking about throughout the class. Then we'll get into what kind of details are included in crash data and the contributing factors that help us identify causes and potential solutions. After we do that, we're going to start focusing on the pedestrian and bicycle crash causes. So there's several factors that contribute to unwalkability, unbikeability, physics, behavior, psychology. They all play their part. Specifically for pedestrians, it's often when a driver isn't paying attention, especially when a pedestrian is crossing the street. For cyclists, typically the crashes are sideswiped by passing cars or being doored from a parked car, which means somebody opening their door suddenly when you are biking by, or a car turning into a cyclist at an intersection, or a cyclist running into debris or a pothole on the roadway. However, pedestrians and cyclists can be at fault too, so sometimes they're just not paying attention or obeying traffic laws or other factors such as alcohol use. So pedestrian and cyclist crashes are a specific concern because studies show that the likelihood of a vehicle-pedestrian crash resulting in injury or even death rises exponentially as vehicle speeds increase over 20 miles per hour. So you can see in this graphic what kind of a visual of this correlation between injuries and vehicle speeds. So the possibility of a pedestrian surviving a crash is about 95% when the vehicle is traveling only 20 miles per hour. It's about 55% just 10 miles an hour faster. And then only about 15% when the vehicle is traveling over 40 miles per hour, so it's pretty significant. So that's why we're talking about ped bike crashes in this course, because the high injury fatality rate is exponential as the speeds increase. So in the class, we'll also review some additional severity-related details and concerns about pedestrian bicycle crashes. So the next section in the class discusses crash trends. So for example, in 2016, there were 34,000 fatal motor vehicle traffic crashes. They're about 50-50 urban-rural right now. So there used to be more of a gap, but now the gap's closed. However, it's still pretty disproportionate when you think about per capita because there's quite a few less people living in rural areas, but the crash rate is still equivalent in rural areas to urban areas. So as you can see on this motor vehicle traffic fatalities chart, the crash fatality rates have been steadily increasing for the last few years, which is a significant concern. They've been decreasing for many years, and just in the last few, we're starting to see an uptick. And we'll talk about reasons why, but as Victoria mentioned, this is a high priority for ODOT and communities. But in general, why are they increasing? So there's a lot of reasons out there. There's a lot of factors. There's not one definitive reason. So on one hand, some pros have been happening over time. There's safer cars. There's a lot of safe driving campaigns. But on the other hand, there's been some new challenges, such as there's just more people driving on the roads. There's also been in recent times a huge uptick in cases of distracted driving, such as people texting. Also, the speed limits on roadways have increased. So a lot of freeways now are 70 miles per hour instead of 65. And then other contributing factors to these challenges include low support to enforce seatbelt use, drunk driving, and speeding. Fortunately, lawmakers don't like to pass unpopular laws, and law enforcement has seen budget cuts that negatively affect their ability to increase patrolling. So in the class, we'll drill down further into these national state crash trends. We'll also get into local crash trends that are customized for each community, and also we'll talk about pedestrian and cyclist specific crashes. Then we'll close out this part of the class with an activity that includes analyzing and discussing local crash patterns. So in part two, we're going to talk about addressing crash fatalities specifically. So first, we're going to learn about the state-level traffic safety programs, projects, and studies that the Department of Transportation offer. And then we'll dig into the three main initiatives that specifically address crash fatalities: Towards Zero Deaths, Road to Zero, and Vision Zero. And we'll understand their differences, similarities, compare and contrast them. And then we'll have an activity at the end of this part that examines local traffic safety projects and how well they're doing, and if there's any fatalities that we need to discuss. So related to traffic safety programs in general, crash data categorizes crashes into three levels of severity: property damage, injuries, and fatalities. And so federal and state governments sponsor and manage programs and funds that help address traffic-related crashes of all of these levels. But then there's also, like I said, there's also these initiatives that are focusing specifically on fatalities, which we'll learn about in class today. So specifically for ODOT, they manage a highway safety improvement program, and it's a core federal aid program with the purpose to achieve a significant reduction in traffic fatalities and serious injuries on all public roads. So, like I said, all public roads, so that's important to know. It's not just state-owned roads, but they will also support any other type of public road in Ohio and on tribal land. So I've got a link in here for the ODOT highway safety page, which in the class we'll go through and explore a bit. But there's, if you Google it or get on their webpage, you can also look through it and see what kind of programs and funds they offer.
Kim, I'm going to interject real quick because we did have a comment that came in through the conversation panel, and I was just going to go ahead and address this because I think I'm having some issues getting my text or my response to go back. But Matt Zone had commented that we need ODOT to help local governments lobby the state legislature to allow for local communities to lower speed limits within our municipal boundaries. And I just wanted to let Matt know that I'm going to pass that comment along to our legislative services office and to ask them to contact him directly regarding their efforts in that area. So that's all I wanted to mention there, so you can keep going. Thanks.
And no, you're fine. That's actually a great comment because we've worked on several projects where that's actually been a roadblock for us. Anytime a state-owned road is going through a community and we feel like the speeds are just too high for people to comfortably walk or bike in their community on that road, we hit this roadblock because it's a state law that you can't lower these speed limits. And I 100% agree we'd need to lobby the legislatures to make that change, or at least let communities have some autonomy in determining those speed limits, because it is a significant issue. So great point. Okay, so a couple more things about ODOT's traffic safety program. A couple projects and initiatives related to what we're talking about today. You know, ODOT funds a mix of projects. So you can do things such as intersection curve realignments, systematic safety treatments like edge line, rumble strips, and cable barriers. But ODOT also sits with driver education enforcement efforts. They're primarily coordinated and funded through the Department of Public Safety, but ODOT does coordinate with that. And then ODOT also has responded to this recent increase in crashes, especially fatalities, by starting up their own Towards Zero Deaths initiative. We won't go into that much into the webinar today, but once again, that's one of the other crash fatality initiatives that are available. In addition, ODOT has a recently completed active transportation action plan, and within that plan, they address ped bike safety through education, infrastructure policy, and data strategies. So that's on their website, and I encourage you to check that out if you're interested. So as I mentioned in the class, we'll go into ODOT's safety programs in a little more detail, what goes into safety studies and these plans. And then after that in the class, we'll review the 3 crash fatality initiatives in more detail, the Towards Zero Deaths, the Road to Zero, and Vision Zero. But today, with just an hour, we're going to focus on just Vision Zero. So for Vision Zero, it first started about 20 years ago in Sweden, where Vision Zero efforts there have cut traffic deaths in half, even while mobility has increased. So this safe systems approach is now gaining momentum in the U.S., with more than 20 local communities adopting Vision Zero commitments between 2014 and about halfway through 2017. So it is gaining ground here, but it is a newer topic, and so that's one of the reasons we want to talk about this with our courses and our webinar today, is to get the word out about what this is and what you can do with it. So the Vision Zero Network is a nonprofit in the U.S. that was started in 2015 to advance Vision Zero with a focus on local action. And that is why we're talking about Vision Zero in this class more in detail than the other two, as Vision Zero is the initiative that focuses on local communities more than the other two. So the Vision Zero Network convenes local leaders to develop and share promising strategies, policies, and practices so everyone can learn from successes. And then there's also a peer exchange amongst community members and local government staff, public health, transportation professionals, police officers, policymakers are all at the table to be connected and collaborate on Vision Zero. So the goals of Vision Zero overarching is to eliminate traffic fatalities and severe injuries. It focuses on safe mobility for all people, particularly for those who are disproportionately impacted by traffic crashes, such as kids, seniors, low-income neighborhoods, communities of color, and people who are walking and biking. So one quote that they like to advertise is, "It can never be ethically acceptable that people are killed or seriously injured while moving within the road transport system." And this is a pretty strong statement, and it's not a statement that really has been made, historically, and we'll talk about that here in the next slide. But when you really think about it, it makes a lot of sense that people just don't need to die on traffic-related crashes. I actually had a personal friend that was killed driving one a few years ago, and it was completely a pointless thing. And it just makes you start thinking, that, people are going to hit each other and injure and damage their cars, but there's things that we can do to keep fatalities and serious injuries from happening. And so that's why this Vision Zero approach is a little different. So traditionally, I think we've all accepted that traffic deaths are inevitable. We usually design for perfect human behavior on our roads, and we just try to prevent collisions, and it's the individual's responsibility to stay safe, and saving lives is really expensive. For those of you that have done studies related to this, you can put a number to a life and cost out how expensive it is. But Vision Zero looks at it a little bit differently and looks at the fact that fatalities are actually preventable, and humans are not perfect, so let's plan for that. And so let's work at preventing these fatalities and severe injury crashes through a more systems-connected approach, and that saving lives is really not too expensive, it's worth it. So these are the fundamental principles that Vision Zero is organized around, where fatalities and severe injuries are preventable, human life and health are priorities, human error happens, so we need to design around that. Safety work should focus on systems level changes, and speed is recognized and prioritized as a fundamental factor in crash fatality. And so just for a little perspective, you can see here on the map that there's cities around the U.S. that have adopted Vision Zero initiatives of some sort. This is as of January 2018. You can see we've got East Coast, West Coast, and Midwest. We don't have any specifically in Ohio on here just yet, but Columbus and Cleveland have been working on some things. So, like I said earlier, this is a newer initiative, but it's a really relevant initiative for everyone. So, it's something to keep in mind that we can add some dots here in Ohio too. So for part 3, we're going to get more into Vision Zero and the basics behind it. So we're going to talk about the main principles, the main components, and then go through the implementation steps. For part 3, it'll be an overview, and part 4 is when we get into the details of implementation. So the Vision Zero principles are, as I mentioned before, everyone has the right to move safely in their communities, and fatalities are not acceptable, and that system designers and policymakers should share in this responsibility to ensure safe systems of travel. So this is one of their infographics on how their ethical platform functions, where we've got engineers, planners, policymakers who are responsible for our infrastructure, planning out a system that then people use, and they're responsible for following the rules, but if something negative happens or people fail to comply or something degrades, then it goes back up to the system designers to react to that and design something that is safer. So this approach recognizes that people will sometimes make mistakes, so the road system and related policies should be designed to ensure inevitable mistakes do not result in severe injuries and fatalities. So system designers and policymakers are expected to improve the roadway environment and policies such as speed management and other related systems to lessen the severity of crashes. So Vision Zero has 9 main components that it organizes around, and these have been found to be the most effective components to build this high-level framework for a community. And this is all based around the collaboration amongst communities in the U.S. who have adopted it already and tried it out. So these are the ones that have been identified as the most useful. So the first component is political commitment. So the highest ranking local officials, such as mayor, city council, city manager, make an official and public commitment to a Vision Zero goal to achieve zero traffic fatalities and severe injuries among all road users, such as even people walking, biking, and transit within a set time frame. So that typically includes the passage of a local policy laying out these goals in the timeline and certain stakeholders, and including a commitment to community engagement, transparency, and equitable outcomes. The second component is that Vision Zero needs to be multidisciplinary. So creating an official city community Vision Zero task force or leadership committee It's charged with leading and planning the efforts for Vision Zero. It should include high-ranking representatives from like the mayor, police, transportation, public health, and other departments that interact with infrastructure such as police and fire, public works, et cetera, et cetera. The third component is creating this action plan or strategy. And it's important to do that within a year of that initial commitment so you still have the momentum. So within the plan, including clear strategies, assigning who owns each strategy, who's responsible, what are these targets, timelines, and performance measures. Equity is also an important component of Vision Zero that's called out specifically throughout the framework. So Vision Zero is committed to an equitable approach where it's important to establish inclusive and representative processes and to commit to equitable outcomes. So ensure measurable benchmarks are created that provide safe transportation options for all road users in all parts of the city. The next component is collaboration. So that's another component that you see throughout the framework is collaboration and engagement. So encouraging meaningful cooperation and collaboration amongst relevant governmental agencies, community stakeholders, and the public is really important. That way, whatever framework is established incorporates everyone's ideas, and people can then share in the goals and focus on coordination and accountability together. A systems-based approach is also important for Vision Zero. So it's important to prioritize this approach and focus on how everything relates and is connected. So focusing on the built environment, the systems and policies that can influence behavior, adopting messaging that emphasizes traffic-related fatalities, that they're preventable is also important here. And then data is also very important in Vision Zero. So it needs to be data-driven. And so gathering, analyzing, utilizing, and sharing reliable data to truly understand the traffic safety issues in the community is that baseline that's needed. There's so much data available nowadays that using what we have to make informed decisions is really important. So it also helps us prioritize whatever we choose to implement first based on the greatest needs and impacts that come out of the data.
Kim, I just wanted to interrupt real quickly. We've had excellent comments from Mr. Zone, who is a council person for the city of Cleveland, and he in the chat pod has been telling us about how for the past year, along with the city of Cleveland chief operating officer, they've been leading the Vision Zero Cleveland task force, and how it includes over 40 stakeholders within City Hall and the community, and has 5 different subcommittees. And if you would be open to it, I would like to unmute Mr. Zone and maybe let him give you just a few comments on this area, because I think that Cleveland, it sounds like, is doing a great job of these components. Would you be okay with that?
Absolutely.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you, Mr. Zone. Hopefully you're open to having that conversation. I've unmuted your phone line. So, are you there? Oh, I was hoping that the phone would work for him. Maybe he's actually dialed in on a regular. Have you dialed in from a 216 number? I'm going to look up his phone number. I think he gave it to us earlier. 4235. I don't see. I've got 3 Cleveland numbers in there. So I tell you, if you would let us know what number you've dialed in from, Mr. Zone, I will go ahead and unmute that phone number itself. And if you want to just keep going, Kim, and as soon as I get him unmuted, I'll go ahead and hopefully he can provide some comments to add to this presentation. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for, let's see. I see a text coming through here.
Yeah, he said that he's actually on his computer, so sorry about that, Mr. Zone. I just was so excited about your comments. I definitely felt that they could enhance a class, and that's one thing you can do when you're live, right, Kim?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
It's definitely not a recording. Yeah, and like I mentioned before, I know Cleveland and Columbus are doing a few things, and if I recall, Cleveland has a website that a pretty robust website that shares all their successes and what they're working on. So I encourage everyone to go to Cleveland's website to see what they're working on. It's exciting to see some implementation here in Ohio, and I'm excited to see what comes out of the efforts thus far. So that's a good transition into our next Vision Zero component, which is community engagement. Um, as mentioned in Cleveland, getting stakeholders and committees and the public involved in this effort is really essential. So you really want meaningful community engagement to get meaningful results. So including the general public on the task force, on committees, getting that broader community input through public meetings, workshops, online surveys, etc., is really important to being effective in our Vision Zero efforts.
We have a question that did come into the chat pod from Tracy Anderson. Can you also share some good examples of policies that organizations can put into place to encourage a culture of traffic safety?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great comment. So as part of this class, and we can share some a little bit later, but as part of this class, we actually will review policies from other communities to see what they have put together. In the next section of this webinar, we're going to talk about the three-step implementation process, and that is the second step, is putting together a good policy. So we can get some information together to send out if that sounds good. Okay, so the next component is transparency. And so ensuring transparency to stakeholders in the community is important so that people are getting regular updates on the progress, on implementation with the action plan, seeing how the implementation is performing with the performance measures, how effective it's being implemented, seeing what results are coming in, are injuries and fatalities actually decreasing in your community. The other thing about these performance measures, other than just celebrating success, is you can also identify where areas are not working in a timely manner so that you can focus on those to be more responsive to making changes so that you are being effective. And having a yearly report to your local governing board, your state of the city type of thing is always helpful to kind of make it official from year to year. How's it doing? Where do you need to improve? And so forth.
Kim, Mr. Zone has called in and I've unmuted him.
Excellent. We'd love to hear about Cleveland and what you guys are doing.
Hey, Victoria and Kim. So first of all, I want to recognize
Sorry,
local bike advocacy
real quick,
Mr.
Zone, if you could mute the audio on your computer because we're getting feedback, that would be great.
I just did.
We do want to hear you. We just don't want to hear you twice.
Yeah. Okay. So my computer is muted,
Okay.
and I think we're having some technical difficulties. I'm speaking through my phone.
Okay. Yeah, I think that sounds better.
I still see that. So maybe we should go on with the presentation and figure out what's going on.
Okay, that's fine. Well, we tried it. So maybe if for the future, Mr. Zone, if you would be interested, we could even work on setting up a separate webinar for you just to speak about your experiences with Vision Zero and what Cleveland's doing there. So I'll contact you after this, and we'll work to get that set up as a follow-up to this one. Thank you.
Not a problem. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Kim.
Thank you. Okay, so as I mentioned, now it sounds like there's feedback for me. Okay.
It stopped.
So as I mentioned, okay, good. There's three main steps into implementation for Vision Zero initiative for your community. The first is the local Vision Zero commitment. The second is establishing a policy, and the third is preparing your action plan and strategy. So the first one, as I mentioned, is the local commitment. So It's an official public announcement. It's a clear message by your local leaders that Vision Zero is a priority. It's very simple but very vocal. So it's just kind of, this is how you start things off. This is where the leaders are saying, this is important, we're going to do something, and we're starting now. Step 2 is creating a policy. So once you have this commitment by your local leaders, you can start working. So staff can create a policy that is passed by your local leaders that includes goals for Vision Zero for your community, a timeline for implementation. It identifies who the stakeholders are going to be, how the public is going to have a chance to participate. It emphasizes transparency and establishes how that's going to be achieved. And it also makes sure that equity is prioritized and how that's going to be achieved. So those are kind of the main components of what goes into your policy. Like I said, we'll be reviewing some in the course, and we can pull some from samples also for everyone to look at. I've got a few, I think I've got 3 or 4 communities right now that I've been collecting. But having that commitment and then moving on right away to establishing that policy and getting it passed are your first 2 steps. And then you really get into the weeds here with your action plan or action strategy, whatever you want to call it. And so as soon as you pass that policy, keep the momentum going and put this action plan together. So in the plan, you're going to have some really clear strategies. You're going to assign who owns those, who's responsible for them. You're going to have some kind of short-term, medium-term, long-term targets, and assign timelines to everything. And the performance measures are also really important because we want to know if we're actually affecting some meaningful change or if we need to tweak something to do that, because that's kind of the whole point, is to really make a difference in our communities with this. Okay, so for part 4, I'm just going to highlight what goes into part 4 today, since we only have our 1-hour time slot today, and I want to leave time for questions. So part 4 is the last big piece of this course, and that's where we really dig into how you implement Vision Zero specifically in your community. And that's the great thing about these Active Transportation Academy courses, is that every time we go out to a community, we work with the applicant in advance. We customize the course for that community with local data, local priorities, and this implementation piece will be customized around your community. So you're going to walk out of here with a pretty good plan of attack to get this going. So you're at the end of this part, you're going to understand the steps, the policies, and the action plan elements. We're going to have 2 activities, interactive activities as part of this part. So first we'll evaluate these Vision Zero action plans and policies from other communities. Then we'll also review some different funding sources and resources that are available that can be used for implementation. And then the second activity is where we're going to formulate a good basis for an action plan for your community. So we'll have attendees go through some foundational and actionable elements that go into a Vision Zero action plan. There'll be kind of like forms and questions to fill out that you can then use to take and develop your plan right after the class. The Vision Zero Network has a lot of good resources that we can build off of and work with the applicant and attendees to really formulate something that you can implement. So to wrap up the webinar today, this is what the full course looks like, the base course. So here's an outline of everything that we'll cover. We'll go through a lot of information. There's a lot of built-in discussions, and there's a lot of in-class activities. So I always feel like people learn better by doing, and especially if you're doing something relevant you can use later. So this will culminate in the building the basic elements to build your Vision Zero action plan for your community. So you can see our main topics that we talked about today and kind of presentations, discussions, activities, and about 4 hours goes into this. So to apply to get a course in your community, whether it's this one or one of the others I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, here's the link to go straight to the application. The requirements are that we like to have at least 15 participants and that you provide a space for the training. You can pull in multiple communities or schools or agencies if you need to. And we can also, you're welcome to apply, and then we can help you with recruiting or coming up with ideas on how to coordinate and get more people to participate. Now, this is a free training, so we want to make sure that we're really maximizing our training instructions to reach as many people as possible. All right, so that is everything I have for the webinar today. I wanted to end a little bit early to talk about questions or ideas from anybody. You can see my contact information here. I said Amelia Mansfield is also on the call, and she's the program manager for this contract, and you can reach her either at that number or her email address is amansfield@burtonplanning.com. So thank you, everybody, and happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Kim. We do have one question that was actually posed, but they asked that I wait till the end to present it to you. And it was from Tricia. She said, could you share some differences between the Complete Streets and Vision Zero initiatives? I think they are complementary, but did Vision Zero supersede Complete Streets? And then while you're responding to this question, what I'm going to do is go through and unmute all of the phone lines. So fair warning, if you have a party going on in the background, like my coworkers sometimes like to do, you might want to ask them to quiet down because I'm going to unmute everybody to give you the opportunity to ask questions verbally. Thanks.
Great, and that's a great question. Complete Streets and Vision Zero are very complementary. So if you're doing something related to Complete Streets, you're probably contributing to making your streets safer. Complete Streets have been around for a while, and Vision Zero is something that is newer here in the U.S. Like I said, it really started picking up speed just in the last few years. So Vision Zero is going to focus not only on Complete Streets, but types of activities, but also some very traffic safety specific things. So you might get more into crash factors and traffic pavement, traffic control, that kind of thing, that maybe for Complete Streets you're focusing more on active transportation and streetscapes, but definitely complementary. And like I said, what you're doing for Complete Streets is definitely that could definitely be something that's part of the action plan, that you're going to do some Complete Streets implementation projects that lend themselves to reducing severity of crashes.
Thank you. Now I have everybody unmuted. So if you have questions, please feel free to ask them over the phone line, or you can still type into the conversation panel. Well, Kim, you've done an excellent job because you've left them all speechless. They have no questions for you. So if you do have any questions, please feel free to ask them, because if you have a question, I'm certain there are many other people that have the same question. Okay. Well, hearing nothing, then we're going to go ahead and thank you this morning, Kim, for your presentation, and Amelia for being on the call as well in the background. And thank you, everyone, for joining. We will be sending out a follow-up link at a minimum with the PowerPoint and information on how to request a session of the Creating a Vision Zero Action Plan course to be delivered in your community, if you'd like to do that. And hopefully, if our recording has worked, we'll send out a link to that as well. So we want to thank everyone for being on the webinar today, and hope everyone have a wonderful holiday season. And we hope to have you back on a webinar or in an LTAP session soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.